Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. This is episode 314, so he hopes you brought pie. It's Matt Morgan.
Well, speaking of food, I actually noticed that there is a difference between the left Twix and the right Twix, and I have to say, the left one just doesn't taste right.
But does the right one taste left, Matt?
Well, it never left the package.
It never left the package? Okay. Wow. Oh, wow. This is silly. We're off to a...
Thank you for humoring me. I know food jokes isn't quite your flavor, but, you know, I'm really trying here.
Yeah, I have yet to build a food token deck, actually. Yeah, this is true. Maybe I should get on that and make them little altars in the art of like little candies and stuff like that.
Left Twix and right Twix. There you go.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, it's the two of us on this episode. What are we discussing this week?
Well, we asked the community kind of what were some recent, maybe disappointing commanders in their minds. Maybe it just didn't live up to the hype. Maybe it didn't do what they wanted it to do. Maybe expectations were in a little different place. So we're going to talk about those responses that we got and see what commanders, in our minds at least, are indeed disappointing.
Yeah, were these commanders letdowns? Did they land with a thud? I'm looking forward to this one, just to sort of calibrate player expectations. It seems like a pretty useful little exercise for us to do. But first, we've got some shout-outs to do. We have got to shout out that we are part of Team Ultimate Guard. Y'all, these sleeves are so good. Their inner sleeves are also so good. And these deck boxes, so compact. I just love them. I just love them, right? Like, these boulders are so good.
Boulders are great. I mean, katana sleeves, they just, to me, they have the best shuffle feel. There's been other brands that have come and gone, but katana's just been the marquee sleeve for forever. And yeah, boulders, when I go to events, I went to Command Fest San Francisco. I bring an Ultimate Guard Smart Hive. It's just the best on-site deck box. It brings everything in there. Got my tokens, got my dice. So good. I love being a part of Team Ultimate Guard.
Yeah, if I want to carry on the greatest number of decks with me without it taking up too much space in my bag, those boulders are compact and perfect, and they also keep stuff secure. Like, it's nice to keep your cards safe, especially when you're out at events. So, like, yeah, can't recommend them highly enough.
Yeah, check out Ultimate Guard if you want to support the show. Also, if you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/EDHRECast. It's a great way to support the show. It's just a way to get yourself a little perk. Now, you can support the show for free. You can go to YouTube, subscribe on the YouTubes. You can like those videos, subscribe in your local podcast apps. Leaving reviews is another great way to support the show. We definitely appreciate every little bit of that. But if you do go to patreon.com/EDHRECast, there's going to be all sorts of tiers for you, whether you want to see the episodes a day early. You can brag to your friends about all the spoilers, but you're not going to tell them what the spoilers are. But you can at least let them know, you got to see everything early. There's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including the coveted weekly patron shoutout. So this week, Lars Brorholt. I'm sure that this name is probably significantly easier to say for Australians, where they're like, "Arnar, brar." But Lars, I do appreciate it. Sadly, I'm not Australian, so Brorholt, maybe you are Australian, maybe it's just brar.
I'm pretty sure that Lars isn't actually Australian. I'm pretty sure that they're actually from Innistrad. They're probably like, this is like the Lamholt, like champion of Lamholt. This is actually Brorholt is like right next to Lamholt on Innistrad is my best guess.
Champion of Lars Holt.
There you go. Champion of Brorholt. Absolutely.
Thanks, Lars Holt. We appreciate the support.
Absolutely. All right, Matt, we are now getting into our topic here. We're talking about disappointing commanders. And yeah, we did ask our community. We asked our patrons as well. We got to, it's really fun to chat with them in our Patreon Discord and stuff like that. And we got a couple of responses, and we have a few of our own here as well. And I think I'm going to start us off with, I don't know, the one that got me thinking about this topic was one Ulrich of the Krallen Horde, speaking of Innistrad, which, I don't know, I don't think this one was received necessarily very well. It kind of landed with a thud, in my opinion.
Yeah, Ulrich of the Krallen Horde is kind of the poster child for, we had expectations for what a certain commander was going to do. Ulrich came out, was supposed to be the werewolf commander, no competition whatsoever, and boy did Ulrich disappoint. So for those of you who don't remember, because this card came out a while ago, 3 red-green for a 4/4 human werewolf. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Ulrich of the Krallen Horde, target creature gets +4/+4 till end of turn, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Ulrich, and on the back end, it fights when you have it flip into a werewolf, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if player casts 2 or more spells, you transform back into the human side.
Yeah, suffice it to say, we're all glad that we got Tovolar instead these days, but it did take a while for us to finally get Tovolar as like a more dedicated and actually like custom made for what werewolf decks want to do kind of deck. Ulrich though, like this one did not feel like it was particularly designed for Commander, and I think a lot of people will probably see this and just like, well, this one wasn't designed with Commander players in mind. Except that it kind of was, and the designers were a little bit taken aback that people didn't like this one. So that's why I think it kind of deserves to be mentioned in this one. We were glad that we finally got a legendary werewolf, but it wasn't legendary werewolfing necessarily.
Not even close, no.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this one, like I said, it's kind of the signpost for when people had expectations for what a certain commander was going to look like. They wanted Ulrich to be a werewolf, but like it doesn't really do much with werewolves. Doesn't care about the rest of your team. It's just caring about itself, and then fights non-werewolves, which like that's fine and all, but like not what people have been looking forward to since the first time that we were in Innistrad. So rightfully so, I am joining the community here. Ulrich of the Crown Horde absolutely was a disappointing commander, and we did get Tovolar years later. I'm happy to see that.
Yeah. When a commander comes out and people are like, well, I think I'll just keep playing Rurik Thar as my werewolf deck instead of this one, that's probably kind of a sign, you know? We're not quite done with Innistrad just yet, actually, though, Matt.
No, we're not.
Because another, like, big example of a commander that really people were like, oh no, has got to be Odric Bloodcursed. Like, we saw the art for this one. We knew the story moment for Odric becoming vampirized, and that was going to be like a whoa type of thing in the story. But then we saw what the card did, and everyone was kind of like, and like
Pardon?
A silence fell across the room. Odric Bloodcursed is 1 red/white for a 3/3 vampire soldier. When it enters the battlefield, you create X blood tokens, where X is the number of abilities from among. I'm not going to read all these out, like flying, first strike, double, like a whole bunch of the different
keywords, Joey.
Yeah, so it makes some blood tokens is what this new Odric does. And suffice it to say, that's not what we wanted for our boy.
Yeah, well, it should tell you a lot that 2 of these legends that we're talking about have less than 500 decks total between the 2 of them.
Yeah.
That's how unpopular both of these have been. And Odric, to me at least, was a case of the first versions that we got of Odric were absolutely powerhouses. They're great cards, still in the 99 of decks in 2024. So Odric the Bloodcursed came out and just absolutely fell short of like what we are so used to seeing, because Odric cards are still powerful, except for this one.
Yeah. And like, I know that people have found stuff to do with this one in more recent times, is like making a whole bunch of artifact tokens and turning those tchotchke decks into like, and here's ways that they can deal damage. Yeah, I think this commander's probably gotten better over time, but that didn't mean that people were excited about it when they first saw it. And Matt, as you said, the numbers have panned out that this one was not. It was not serving. It was not really giving, especially for like how hyped up it was. That art goes so hard. That story moment is so epic.
Sure. Yeah.
And so for the card that represents that moment to be not particularly exciting compared to the gravity that it was given in the story, I think that's where our expectations feel like we ended up a little crestfallen.
Yeah, it's just such a weird moment, because Odric as a character in the lore, like, I don't pay too much attention to the story of Magic, but I know who Odric is. I know the significance of the character. And so for a massively significant character to kind of be, well, I guess this is trying, it really did feel to me even like that there was a disappointment going on here.
I mean, there was a whole Ristic Studies video on Odric, you know, like, and yet it still was just like, oh no. And it does come down to like, well, if you just want to make a whole bunch of artifact tokens, there are commanders even just like Togo that can make a whole bunch of them just by playing lands. And so the hoops that you had to jump through for this one, they're a little bit tough, and it does not surprise me to see that it's only got 352 decks to its name. And Matt, I'm not gonna lie, it's actually right next to another commander that I also wanted to mention in this episode.
Not even the last Boros commander that we're going to talk about. Yeah.
No, I think there are a lot of Boros commanders to talk about, actually. On the Boros Commanders EDHREC page, there's also like Gerard Weatherlight Hero right next to Odric at a little bit less popularity. And I remember a lot of hype coming up for this one because we finally get a cool new Gerard. And
nothing.
And also it was billed as a powerful Boros commander that was going to not play into the usual Boros problem of always being around equipment or combat. And indeed, it's not around equipment or combat. It's not good, though.
Yeah, so for folks who haven't been playing a long time, Boros has really had this problem where it kind of got shoehorned into doing the exact same thing as it always did. And only over the past few years have we really had a chance to really explore what Boros could be. We've gotten cards like Osgir the Reconstructor that plays around with fun artifact synergies, but we got so many auras and equipment type of commanders. So we could just have a whole conversation about like the Boros equipment commanders that really tried, but just fell short of like really making any sort of impact, or a special and unique impact even.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I think really it just broke my heart that like stuff like Tatiova got made by accident with how good they are, whereas Gerard Weatherlight Hero, like a lot of time went into this one, and it still was just kind of not, like people were still just like, there's not a lot of fun stuff that I wanted to do with this in a Boros deck though. Gerard Weatherlight Hero, that is a 4-mana 3/3 human soldier. When it dies, you get all of your stuff back that died that turn, which could be interesting, but like you can also just play a Selfless Spirit in your decks if you want to protect your stuff, so it wasn't... It still actually wasn't, unless you're doing like a combo egg strategy, Gerard is still like accidentally leaning into some of the same problems that you were having before. And Matt, like you said, the equipment stuff, we've got so many. We got so many.
It's dime a dozen for equipments. And if you look at the top page of Boros commanders, there's a lot of overlap as far as what the strategies are. And then I'm glad that we got stuff like Anam Pakal, who, it's cool. You get to go wide, you get to put +1/+1 encounters on things. It was finally kind of a fresh take on something we hadn't really seen much of in Boros colors. So that was definitely a welcome addition with when we got that with Lost Caverns of Ixalan. But you do get some fun ones like Brian Stoutarm, which is an older commander. But man, you look at it and it's either something to do with combat damage, like a Gisela Blade of Gold Knight, stuff like that, or it just goes back to more and more of the equipments and the Voltron strategies. And so it's nice in 2024 that we're getting some sort of variety with different strategies that we're going to get in Boros colors now.
Yes, it's nice that we're no longer getting like all in a row Bruno Battlehammer and Cole and Aster and Rayav, and like it's nice to not necessarily have that continually be a thing. But I don't think that we can move away from Boros just yet, because I think the ultimate like pinnacle example has got to be the Boros Precon with Kalemny and Anya Merciless Angel, right?
I mean, I know that you hate this one, and it's the reason that you hate one of my favorite Simic commanders, which did nothing wrong other than be printed in the same set.
I do dislike Izuri Claw of Progress. In fact, yeah. So I don't hate the Boros Precon. I hate that the Boros Precon got short shrifted in its design space, because to me, power 2 or less as a reason to gain experience, like starting from scratch, that should have been given to the red-white color pair, not to the green-blue color pair. And casting big stuff, that feels like it lands a lot more in the green-blue color pair. So in my opinion, the reason that Kalemny and Anya, like as that deck, ended up being a little bit of a disappointment for players was because like starting from scratch, the design was like putting the wrong things in the wrong place, and they gave something to Simic that Simic didn't necessarily need. It's not necessarily a big part of Simic's color pie the way that it is for Boros' color pie. So like I think we can trace the roots back to what the actual culprit was here. But even regardless of that, the end product that we got with Kalemny wasn't great. it just wasn't great. And those designs, like when we had an opportunity for a true Boros Precon, one of the first ever, it was not, unfortunately, changing the game for Boros in a way that a product of that kind could have changed the game. And that's the disappointment.
Yeah, and this happened a long time ago. So a lot of players probably weren't even playing back when Commander 2015 came out. But yeah, Kalemny, Disciple of Erois, and Anya Merciless Angel. When you look at the top commanders from that Precon cycle, both of them are bottom of the barrel. Like there were 5 decks put out there, 10 total face commanders. The bottom 2 are Boros. They had such a profound unimpact. That's not even the right way to say it, but like it was wild how unimpressive they were and just how unpopular this set was. Because and Joey, we're kind of spoiled. We talk a lot on the show about how great the Precons were. This was not the banner year for Boros, though.
No, not at all. Kalemny currently has 761 decks to her name, and that gives me the sadness.
Yeah, and Anya, who has been around for forever, 180, less than 200 decks. That I think that should tell listeners kind of how well they came across.
To quote Mohart, it's not stunning. Anyway, I think we can probably move on from the Boros talk about, like, Boros obviously occupies a big part of the crestfallen conversation.
Yeah.
But we can't stay here forever.
It has gotten better in recent years.
So much better.
So okay, so let's get away from Boros then. We don't need to talk about Boros for forever. Let's talk about something super different, which is Jeskai. And there is a Jeskai commander actually that one of our good friends who's a moderator of our patron Discord known for building Jeskai brews. Nostro, Voice of the Crags, is a Jeskai commander that people thought were supposed to be very interesting. It was not. That wildly disappointing. So Nostro, Voice of the Crags, 1 in Jeskai colors, so a blue, a red, and a white for a 3/3 Chimera. Tap it and choose 1 where X is the number of spells you've cast this turn, and you can scry X, have Nostro deal X damage to target creature, or you gain X life. That's asking for a lot of work, and you're really not getting a lot of payoff for that.
That's just the thing, right? Like, this... It's obviously encouraging you to play a bunch of spells at once, sort of a storm deck. But for the payoff to be some life gain or setting up your next turn, or you can pick off a creature, I get why that wasn't compelling. Now, I'm not saying that I wish that this could, for example, deal X damage to target player, because I actually think that that would probably be broken.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that probably would not be great design if it could just like, all right, well, this is definitely only a combo commander, only a storm type of thing command. But like, yeah, it was trying to hedge its bets in a way that I totally understand why Angelo at the Jeskai was not pleased with this Jeskai commander. It wasn't giving, and I understand it. Even though I know why it was restrained, it ended up being a little bit too restrained.
Well, and Jeskai colors to me, and I want to say, and call me crazy, somewhere along the line, there was a conversation by some designers on social media, and they said like Jeskai's actually like probably the hardest 3-color combination to design for, because they do a lot of different things. And when you look at some more recent Jeskai colored commanders, like from Baldur's Gate, we had Dynaheir, Invoker Adept. I recently got to play a Commander Sealed event and opened that, and it was really fun, but it was also kind of hard to find activated abilities that were 4 or more mana that were kind of worth copying. And you have some cards in there, but Jeskai always to me has kind of felt like, where's its identity lie, where all 3 of those colors can kind of get along. And whereas other colors like Jund to me always has felt like, yeah, Jund is pretty well figured out.
You Jund him.
And Jeskai just hops. Yeah, you Jund him out. Yeah, that's all you got to do.
Yeah.
Whereas Jeskai, you can't Jeskai him out, because you just kind of have to figure things out on your own.
No, out, go, be gone.
No, I'm here to stay. Data's not here to protect you, Joey. You're stuck with me.
So silly. You know what, Matt? I'm going to do the thing that you just did. We're going to move away from Boros into something totally different, Jeskai. Well, we're going to move now from Jeskai into something totally different, Azorius. One of our patrons mentioned when we were having this discussion in our Patreon Discord, they mentioned the 11th Doctor. And I thought this was such a great pick. So the Woo Burger King in our Discord mentioned that they were really, really disappointed with the 11th Doctor, which is a 3-mana Azorius, 3/2 Time Lord Doctor, and it has this ability: whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may exile a card from your hand with a number of time counters on it equal to its mana value, and if it doesn't already have Suspend, it gains Suspend. And a 2-mana activated ability that can allow target creature with power 3 or less to not be blocked this turn. That's a lot of words for, unfortunately, not a lot of payoff. Like, you can, I guess, make the 11th Doctor unblockable for some extra mana, as long as it is still tiny, and then you can take a card from your hand, and then you can use time counters on it instead of having to pay mana for it. But the time counters being equal to its mana value, it's trying to not be Joyra of the Gitu, which gave 4, just a flat 4 to things, but like Joyra cheated around stuff in a really important way, and this one is just a lot tougher to do stuff with. So Woo Burger King, I'm with you. This one also was like, I'm not even much of a Whovian, but like this one also kind of was just like, I can't see a way to make this good.
If you exile and expropriate with 11th Doctor, you're never casting it. Games just don't go that long unless something really, really went awry.
You're really having to do a whole lot of other stuff with manipulating time counters in order to make any of that happen. And the unfortunate reality is that there are so many other things that do stuff with time counters now that this one isn't necessarily going to be a great option for that. And trying to fuse that with, and also I can make my tiny creatures unblockable, is such a weird line to, like, you're straddling 2 very different strategies there. And it just, I totally get why this one doesn't feel like it has any cohesion outside of potentially it being flavorful. The deck cohesiveness there is very odd and very difficult to make it do impressive things.
Yeah, and sometimes too, I've had similar frustrations. Like maybe the character was kind of built up and if people were very excited about it. I know from the Fallout sets, Preston Garvey was kind of the same for me, where I was very excited to see this character and to see it on kind of, in my mind at least, a so-so card, or maybe even like the 11th Doctor where it was kind of slow. Yeah, I definitely was disappointed in the same way that I'm sure Whovians kind of saw the 11th Doctor like, really? oh, well, that kind of stinks. And like Preston Garvey for me, and I love Fallout 4, probably one of my favorite video games of all time. And to see Preston Garvey, there wasn't anything with like survivors, it was just kind of encampment stuff. I don't know. It missed the mark, and then especially in the execution, which is a rarity. I love the Fallout set. I think they nailed so many things, but Preston Garvey especially I felt very let down by how central that character was to the Fallout 4.
That is something to praise about, like, for example, the way that Lord of the Rings did its execution, where there were several different types of those characters, which fit really well for Lord of the Rings, since that story is so much about, the changes that these folks go through, the way that Frodo is completely a different person by the end of that story. But, like, there are multiple versions, so if one didn't land, thankfully another might. And that's not a luxury that they can do with every Universes Beyond product. So I get why sometimes when there is only that one chance to capture it, and it falls kind of short, that does feel like even more of a, dang it.
Yeah, it was so close. I see what they were trying to go for, but yeah, it's just sometimes you miss. But I do agree. Lord of the Rings just nailed it as far as like, okay, well, this one version expresses how maybe a person was in a certain scene, in a certain chapter of that book, and then they move on. Fallout, they didn't get that opportunity. So yeah, that's a really good point, Joey. And absolutely applies here.
Well, Matt, I am sorry to hear that about your Fallout cards, but how about now we fall in to challenge the stats? I haven't made that joke before already on the show, have I? I probably have.
I don't think you have, because I would have remembered how
bad it was.
Much of an attempt there was. Yeah. I'm not going to say bad. There was an attempt, and that's all I can comment on how this segue is going.
That's okay. I'll say it was bad. I'll own it. But we are still going to move into challenge the stats, because there's so much other data here on EDHREC that we got to talk about, because we don't always agree with it. So let's take a quick break for challenge the stats.
In Magic the Gathering, it's not easy being a fan of ripping packs or repacks. We hype ourselves up thinking we could pull an Underground Sea. It's all just a shot in the dark. Until now. Introducing slab packs from arenaclub.com, the only repack that provides a real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Now when I buy slab packs on Arena Club, it finally feels like I know what I'm getting. I love how Arena Club makes buying, trading, and displaying your cards so easy. Their grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent. When you send a card to them for grading, they provide a full explanation on the complete grade your valuables received. They'll even store your valuables in their vault if you don't have one at home. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase by going to arenaclub.com/EDH. Wow, that is a crazy offer. 10% off a $400 slab pack? That's $40 right there. Anyways, that's arenaclub.com/EDH for 10% off your first purchase. All right, Joey, I know you don't like the Fallout references, and I'm not going to be a yes man to all of your segues, but I do have a yes man, this is a good challenge. So for those of you who don't know, we do have content actually on EDHREC. It's not just the YouTube channel here. And Andy Zupke does some great work writing articles for us. Did a Precon upgrade on kind of what he would do with the Sultai pre-constructed deck from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, specifically the decks that are playing Felix 5 boots at the helm. So that is one of the new Sultai commanders, 2 black, a green, and a blue for a 5/4 Ooze Rogue with Menace and Ward 2. It also has, if a creature you control dealing combat damage to a player causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And in Andy's article, he points out that there's a lot of really good combat triggers that you want to be copying, whether it's stuff like Coastal Piracy and all sorts of different draw effects. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on, but sometimes they don't always come on evasive creatures. And one thing that you want to make sure you're putting into your deck is going to be evasion. Just ways to make your creatures unblockable, give them flying, whatever it looks like. And Aqueous Form is a card that I think we just kind of overlook so many times in so many decks, because it's just a common from Theros. It's just a blue mana for an aura that says an enchanted creature can't be blocked. And whenever enchanted creature attacks, you scry 1. So currently, Aqueous Form is only showing up in 17% of Felix 5 Boots decks, and I think that's just pretty low. I think for just such a low investment cost, plus whenever you're attacking, you know that you're going to get your combat trigger short of a fog or anything like that. But also, scrying 1 isn't insignificant. That makes sure that your next draw is going to be set up at least a little bit better, whether it's a Coastal Piracy draw, any sort of thing like that. So if you are playing Felix 5 Boots decks, make sure you're not completely overlooking any sort of evasion on those high impact combat damage triggers. Aqueous Form is just a great way to do that. It's going to make all your creatures impossible to block with this one. But yeah, just putting any sort of evasion in your decks is going to be super, super important with these Felix 5 Boots decks. So make sure you give those a look.
Matt, I like that. Please don't put that onto an old Gnawbone in a Felix 5 boots deck. It will get past all of my evasive spirits, but you will make so many treasures and it will be upsetting to me.
It will be very upsetting to the table trying to track everything that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, Matt, I'm going to move to our listener-submitted challenge now, and this one comes to us from Sophie Williams, who sent us an email talking about Cold-Eyed Selkie in Otrimi decks and how awesome this effect is. Cold-Eyed Selkie is a 3-mana 1/1 Merfolk Rogue with Island Walk, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw that many cards, which is terrific for Otrimi, where you mutate onto that, make this into a 6/6. You hit someone, Otrimi has trample, so you're probably going to, even if they can block that stuff, if they don't have the islands and the forests, which plenty of players will not, you still got trample and you're going to be able to deal a good chunk of damage and draw a good chunk of cards. And that is why, as Sophie points out, Cold-Eyed Selkie is one of the most popular cards to add into Otrimi decks. But Matt, this is for you. Talking about Fallout cards, Sophie Williams wanted to mention that the new card Curie Emergent Intelligence would also be a pretty decent pick for a very, very similar effect. The relevant text here being that it's a 2-mana 1/3 blue robot, so you can mutate onto it because it's not a human. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw cards equal to its base power. So it is going to be base power there rather than any modifications, but mutate turns that base power into Otrimi 6/6. And again, you've got the trample. So once again, you can do some pretty cool stuff with that ability to draw a whole bunch of extra cards. And this is only 2 mana to play. Sophie, I think this is a great pick. It fills a very similar role to one of the coolest cards in an Otrimi deck. If you need more card draw in your mutate deck, yeah, give this one a look. And Matt, I hope you like the Fallout pick.
Oh, I absolutely do. It's always fun, especially Curry, who was the last remaining doctor. I know it's not Doctor Who, but a doctor in a vault. I'm going to get sidetracked here. We should get out of Challenge Stats to talk about Curry and on all the Fallout lore here. Yeah, I'm just going to get sidetracked.
I got your Yes Man reference, but I got no other thing, including this. I will not understand any other Fallout reference for sure, which is, I think, quickly becoming a habit with me. I'm not getting your Dune references. I'm not going to get all your Fallout references. I don't like what this is revealing about me here on our show.
I mean, you're just not a very good nerd. That's all I got to admit.
No. I've also admitted in another video that I've never actually played a Zelda game as well. So
that's a little more for. I don't own a Switch either, but I do love the classics.
Oh man. So anyway, all right. But before we dive too deep into stuff that Joey hasn't done and still needs to do, let's get back into it. Matt, what is the next thing that you want to talk about in terms of commanders that kind of missed the mark and were not necessarily received with loving arms by the community? The community was actually a little bit aw about.
So this one actually was one that we got some responses back about this one, but I actually kind of disagree with those. So some folks had mentioned Feather Radiant Arbiter was a commander they felt kind of underwhelmed by, disappointed in how it came out. So Feather is red, white for a 4/3 flying lifelink angel. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell that targets only Feather Radiant Arbiter, you may choose any number of other creatures that spell could target and pay 2 mana for each of those creatures. If you do, for each of those creatures, copy that spell, then that copy targets that creature. So looking at this is kind of it's a Zada type of ability in different colors. You get Boros colors, but the Zada ability of being able to copy it for every eligible target is something that we've seen before. And I understand where the frustration comes from, but man, giving Boros that type of ability straight up without having to pay per extra target, I could see that getting out of hand extremely fast.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So this is an interesting one for us to mention here because it's one that you didn't actually necessarily agree with. Mm-hmm. It is definitely the case that a lot of, when we asked this question, a lot of people mentioned this one, but it's not necessarily something that you feel quite as disappointed by?
I don't really, because I think what happened was the original Feather that we got was absolutely cracked. It was just super busted, just powerful, super good. Joe, you had that deck for a long time, and we talked about it on the show. Once that thing got established, it was impossible to interact with. There was just so many ways to recur everything. So the first Feather deck that we saw was wildly powerful. And then Zada, which is one of the most popular commanders of all time. I mean, Zada Hedron Grinder has been around for a long time and is kind of known for all you need is one spell in an army. So that's an extremely high bar that we're kind of comparing Feather Radiant Arbiter next to. But also, White has a lot of cards that if you're going to put it on every single creature like the original Zada does, I think that would just get out of hand extremely fast and just turn into kind of a samey every deck is going to look the same because you're going to be super, super tuned to the maximum degree with that type of deck. So I understand why players are disappointed because they see what it could have been because we have very direct corollaries, but also I'm glad it isn't because it's another commander that kind of would have come out and every deck would have looked the exact same.
I see where you're coming from on this one. I do get a lot of the feelings of like why people would name this, especially because of the comparisons that you mentioned. And I do think that you're absolutely right for us to like make sure that we don't have expectations in our mind so steadfastly based off of previous iterations that then, because what is that phrase? Sometimes expectations are just premeditated disappointments is a phrase that I've heard sometimes.
I've never heard that, but I get it though. But also I don't want another deck having the ability to cast one Grim Reaper Sprint and then just run away with the game. Like there's enough decks out there already. We don't need another one.
Well, and that actually is kind of a thing too. I think that this feather has found a more unique stance compared to the previous feather in that like this one is doing stuff with auras rather than just with spells. So it is nice that it did find its own specific niche here. I actually want to move us into another example here that I know that you don't feel the same way about, but I do agree with the community when they mentioned this one, and that's Gimbal Gremlin Prodigy, the Teamer Gremlin Artificer 4/4 that gives your artifact creatures trample, and at the beginning of your end step, you create a 0/0 red Gremlin artifact creature token, and you put counters on it equal to the number of differently named artifact tokens you control. This was also one that we saw people name a lot when it came to commanders that they felt disappointed by. You actually kind of like this one. You like the hoops that it has to jump through, I believe?
Yeah, I don't mind several hoops that a player would have to go through in order to get to a very high payoff. And so there's all sorts of different tokens that you can be making. And I think everybody kind of defaults to clues, food, and treasures because, I mean, Academy Manufactor is one of the most popular cards of all time, and it hasn't been out all that long. But also there's so many different ways you can make different tokens. And you look at the typical deck, there are some fun things going on. People are making blood tokens. They're making Thopters and servos and kind of going all over the place, but you're still in green. So you're able to play cards like Doubling Season Parallel Lives, if that's the type of flavor that you want. But then also you're getting a bunch of new tokens too. Like you have Roxanne Starfall Savant, which people are coming out with already, that's going to make Meteorite tokens. That's super interesting right there. So I think that this one, it's in Teamer colors, so people are kind of used to the extreme value engines, and this is not that. So that's where I think the disappointment comes from, is they see Teamer colors and expect a little bit more automatic value, whereas this one you do have to go through some work to get.
I will agree that, like, I think that commanders with cool hoops that don't solve their own equations, give me more of that every single day.
Oh, absolutely.
I do, however, still agree that, like, when I think of what should a legendary gremlin from Kaladesh do, it doesn't look like this. This does feel confusing to me. The flavor is not flavoring. I feel very confused by this one, and I get why people would name it. I do, though, think that this is probably one of those commanders that over time does have more paths open to it, and that is something nice to see. Sometimes a commander can be a little bit odd when we first see it, but over time there might be more room for it to grow, and that is sort of my hope currently for Gimbal. But I also felt the same way when I first saw the Precon. I was just like, I think this Precon's a mess. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I understand. I agree with a lot of the stuff like you said about, like, yeah, we do want some of these hoops to jump through, and those can be fun. It is nice to have commanders that give you puzzles to solve. So I look forward to seeing what other puzzles this one does in the future, I guess.
Well, so you mentioned sometimes we get disappointed because the commander gives us a puzzle. Maybe it's a little too hard to solve. There's two commanders that both of us kind of thought of pretty quickly when we got to this topic of, they don't really give you a puzzle to solve at all as much as they give you the solved puzzle because they kind of build themselves. So in that realm, Prime Speaker Vanifar absolutely falls into this camp of this commander. It's not even a fun brewing experience, I think, because it always lends itself to building the exact same as every other deck. And I can't count the times where somebody said, oh, it's not that Prime Speaker Vanifar deck. And then the narrator says, it was that Prime Speaker Vanifar deck.
Yeah, that one really does. The disappointment is of such a different nature than the other stuff we were talking about here, because it does that is one that is just so prescriptive. It does just, like, the commander is doing everything for you, and it does, as you said, take a little bit of the charm out of the deck building, and trying to dodge the things that this commander can do that are so broken is so difficult as to sometimes almost be impossible. And so you said there were two, and the other Simic commander that we got to name here, that I think you're right does have some of the same issues, would be Volo Guide to Monsters. This one, I saw the excitement spike up, and then the hype really crashed when people actually got to finally start playing with it. Volo Guide to Monsters, that is the 4-mana 3/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, you copy that spell, and of course, a copy of a creature spell becomes a token. So when this one came out, everyone was like, oh, awesome, what a neat new take on Simic. It's going to do something that we don't usually see from Simic, and here's a tough deck building restriction. It's not just going to be like, oops, all landfall, draw 8 billion cards. You have to do something really difficult in the deck building stage. And it turns out, not really. It turns out you can just make this a Simic good stuff type of deck, and you will be just fine. It's a lot of the same classic cards that are already good in a lot of Simic decks is what people really quickly discovered with Volo, and I understand why they felt a little bit let down by that experience.
Yeah, I mean, people, like we said, people like having hoops to jump through sometimes, and when a deck just kind of guides you into building the absolute lowest common denominator, because like you're going to get rewarded for that, so why would you work harder than you have to? I think that's where people kind of get disappointed, because you don't want the commander to solve the problem it gives you. I at least like enjoying have a little bit of a challenge going on there. And I think that's one response that we actually got along these same lines. Rachel Weeks, good friend of ours on the Command Zone podcast, talks about Go Shintai of Life's Origin, because it not just gives you a problem, but it solves it for you all at once. And it kind of makes so many other potential commanders in that strategy almost obsolete, because there's no reason not to be doing the thing that Go Shintai wants you to do, kind of in the same way that Prime Speaker Vanifar and Volo, they don't really give you any like incentive to do anything other than what they're kind of just guiding you into doing anyways.
Yeah. Oh, I really feel that. And I've heard from a lot of Go Shintai players as well that they're kind of like, this one is doing it all for me, and it feels like I, as the player, like the cards are playing themselves, is I guess basically the way that it starts to feel. And I also understand why that's not necessarily an experience that people always are like. The experience of playing it feels different than the experience that when you first read the card. Because it is exciting. Look how many things it can do. Finally, something cool for a Shrines deck. But it is also, for instance, like that ability that it also has, the 5-color activated ability to return an enchantment from your graveyard to the battlefield. It is kind of also ousting that from other commanders that might have wanted to do something in similar territory. Like, I know a lot of people were also kind of sad about, again, Arcanum Weaver, the Mardu Enchantress deck, which can sacrifice your enchantments to bring back from your graveyard other enchantments. And so not only is Go Shintai doing things like, well, I'm sort of the de facto Shrine deck, and you're going to have to try really, really hard to ever find a different and more compelling Shrine commander, but also I'm kind of eating up space that other commanders were trying to do, and I'm doing it a little bit better than they can anyway. And that starts to feel a little bit rough in two different areas, and that's why I think Go Shintai is such a strong example here. Yeah,
so you get two different sides of the coin where, I mean, why wouldn't you do this? But also, it gets so bad that obsolescence of commanders, that really kind of gets in the territory where, like, let's not just completely invalidate any other card that you could be trying to do for this strategy. So yeah, I totally get where Rachel's coming from. And also the point about Gen. Yes, there's potential there for Gen to be trying to do something, but why would you want to? You're kind of kneecapping yourself when you could be just play Go Shintai. And like situations like that, it's not good, helpful feedback, because sometimes people want to play within certain limitations, but man, the upside is so high with Go Shintai. Yeah, it's kind of discouraging when you wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, ultimately, this is kind of a different version of like why a commander might be disappointing, and that it is like sometimes commanders are disappointing because they aren't good enough, and sometimes commanders are disappointing because they're doing it all for you, and they're like almost too good or something like that. And those are very different sides of the coin, but they still produce some of the same player experience. And I think as like one other thing to touch on too, which we kind of hinted at like with the Audric example, is that sometimes we're also just disappointed in a card because of like what we thought the character would be. And like when that character finally gets a card, it isn't doing what we had necessarily hoped for it. I know I felt that way with Nivinarol Urborg Tyrant, the Esper 6-mana 3/6 zombie wizard that is basically kind of just a repeat of Nivinarol's Disc. It also has this ability about making tapped zombie tokens, but when I really looked at it, I was like, I didn't expect the Urborg Tyrant Nivinarol to just do the same thing that Navineral's disc already does, where you're paying 1 and destroying all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So that one felt like a letdown to me too, because I'm just like, I just didn't think that character would do that if the disc is already doing what this. It felt weird to me, you know?
Yeah, and I don't want to say lazy. I hate using that word when describing people's like work and something that they're probably very proud of.
Yeah.
But it just felt uninspired, I think is a polite way to describe Navineral, especially because, yeah, it's just a copy of what's already been going on. Whereas on the same lines, Feldon also has nothing to do with the flavor that we've seen from his character either. So you either get like a carbon copy of it or something completely unrelated. So you have Feldon Ronom Excavator, which is the newest one that we saw in Brothers War. And I don't think that flavor really lines up with Feldon of the Third Path at all, where you're talking about the reanimation and something that's been played a lot. Like Feldon of the Third Path is one of the more played kind of mono red staples that you're going to find. It's in a ton of decks. It has a ton of decks to its name as well. But man, the Ronom Excavator version of Feldon is completely disconnected even. So there's just kind of two extremes of this same coin here, where there's no inspiration and no kind of playing around with it. And then it's just absolutely, completely severed from what we would otherwise expect.
Especially because that first version that we saw of Feldon of the Third Path, is one of the best flavor executions. Like that card is a piece of art.
Oh, absolutely.
And so absolutely. I totally understand why you, like, if you like this character and you see this one, you're like, huh, that's not what I'd hoped for. And like, I have to shout out along that exact same line, the first time that we saw Ludovic Necro Alchemist, the Is It Ludovic, which came out in Commander 2016, that one I also remember a lot of people being like, that's not what I wanted this character to do. That's the 3-mana Is It 1/4 human wizard. At the beginning of each player's end step, that player may draw a card if a player other than you lost life this turn and it has partner. Like, that is actually a very cool piece of design, but it just doesn't feel like that's what Ludovic should do from what we'd heard of the story of Innistrad and all the interactions that Ludovic has with like Gisa and Geralf. You can't even play Gisa in a Ludovic deck unless you partner it with something else that may not even be Innistrad-y. So like, people wanted an Innistrad commander that you could do a bunch of Innistrad stuff with and play all of your favorite zombie-ish stuff. And like, it's called the Necro Alchemist. So why is it so weird to like try and build a flavor deck this way? And why is Ludovic playing politically instead of playing around with zombies, which is what we know Ludovic does in the story? And it took years until we got a different type of Ludovic card that could actually do stuff with zombies. So yeah, it's just when what we know about these characters is doing something different on the card, the execution starts to feel weird. That also can start to feel like a very strange disappointment as well.
Yeah, well, especially when it's something very well known about this character too. So like you said, Ludovic is very well known as a kind of mad scientist when it comes to zombies and reanimating them, and a Frankenstein inspired type of character. And so seeing that have nothing to do with the card and the execution of that character on the card, I understand why there'd be a little bit of a disconnect. We talked about that a couple times already with previous commanders we've talked about today. And so, yeah, it is kind of strange seeing, okay, well, we know this about Ludovic, and then we get something that is not something we know at all because there's nothing to do with it. Yeah, there's a weird kind of, again, a disconnect between not just the expectations, because sometimes we put those on ourselves, but
right.
The card that we've been led up to believe what it should look like, and then the final product.
Right. Honorable mention to Nylea, who doesn't have reach, despite the fact that she's enormous and has a bow.
I mean, yeah, it is kind of weird that an archer god, basically, does not have the ability that every archer in the game has as reach.
Now, Matt, there's one final category here, which I think I'm just going to let you take this. I don't entirely agree with your takes here. Just like you were kind of like pushing back a little bit on like Feather or Gimbal. This one, I'm not 100% on with you. I'm probably like 50% on with you. But I know that you have some thoughts and feelings about the new Capenna Precons.
Oh, they're the worst Precons that we've gotten. They are.
The worst.
Don't laugh at me. They're not the worst, because Precons have come a long, long way as far as just being a cohesive unit and everything. But as the kind of the stock in pre-constructed decks has risen over the years, there's always a dip. There's always a little bit of like, oh, you got to buy into the dip. The Precons for New Capenna, those were that dip. I mean, I don't know any way else to put it when you had cards around all the different factions on New Capenna. But man, in a world full of Precons, there's very little reason to kind of buy into these.
So I do recall you talking about like playing some of these precons, and you were just like, after one game, I'm just done with this. I think you'd had experiences with like Kit Kanto and Kami's Obscura Oculus were like not producing gameplay that you liked, and I think your critique was really like how grindy the games ended up being, especially.
Yeah, so again, my experience playing these out of the box was against all of them all together, and all of them just became a grind fest. Every deck kind of felt very samey. So even though they intentionally had, we're going to put different cards here, they're going to try and get away from the different strategies and make something unique. Nothing really felt like it carved it out. Like everything kind of very much felt like, the play patterns are all the same. They're all doing things about the same time too, no matter what the commander was. So the gameplay just felt very vanilla in my mind. And then when you take apart that and separate it into, here's the different commanders, here's what it's going to look like outside of the pre-constructed decks. You either had the Beamtown Bullies that was just, okay, again, it's that Beamtown Bullies deck, or you got cards that just not very many people cared about, like Denry Klin, stuff like that, where like there's only 700 decks out there of Denry Klin because it just kind of doesn't do anything really interesting.
So the reason I said that I'm like 50% with you is because, stuff like Henzi Toolbox Torre, I like that one. I like that one a whole lot. Stuff
wildly popular commander, yeah.
Absolutely. Stuff like Parness the Subtle Brush, subtle is a great word for that, because if it is in a game, I don't know what it's doing to that game, is I guess kind of the thing. There's a lot of confusion for me when it comes to the identity of New Capenna stuff. I think Henzi's cool, but I'm like, what is Vazikeen Negotiator doing? Giving people treasures, and then sometimes you get +1 counters, and it's just like, to me, actually, I think that the New Capenna stuff kind of suffers from that word salad problem of just like, it's actually hard for me to figure out what a whole bunch of these even do. It's difficult for me to retain what these commanders are all after, because they are doing so many disparate things all at once, and again, straddling both of those lines is a little bit harder for me. So I don't feel a whole lot of like resonance with a lot of these characters, because a lot of them are just, they take me several read-throughs to understand in the first place, which is kind of why I appreciate something like Henzi, which is a lot more straightforward, and it is doing what, like, that one makes the most sense to me of like what that Jund faction is trying to do on New Capenna. I think that the Jund one especially is like probably the strongest. And Hello, the Painter with the casualty stuff, that one also makes a lot of sense to me. But some of the others I do think kind of suffered. Kit Kanto is doing weird stuff. It's like Token Zango. So some of them are, I think, to me, just the overall effect that I found was a little bit of confusion rather than excitement. So I understand where your frustration is coming from with that.
Well, and just even the cards in the decks, like we're used to the pre-constructed decks being kind of juiced to the gills with like all these powerful cards, and you just don't really see that a lot. I know people were extremely high on Smuggler's Share for a long time, but man, the excitement around that card really diminished. And so you're looking at the cards in the 99 that came in these pre-constructed decks, there's one card above 2% adoption, that's pretty low considering what we've kind of been conditioned to expect from pre-constructed decks. And so, Smuggler's Share, people were very excited about it. I think everybody's kind of cooled off on it a little bit too, because you get cards like Trouble in Pairs and all those kind of just better versions of what that was trying to do to begin with.
Interesting. I know that some folks like Rachel Weeks, for example, has actually mentioned she's a big fan of a lot of the cards from New Capenna Commander in the 99. So we might have to have her on so that you two can duel about that.
That's fine. I mean, I've dueled Rachel before. She won. She'll probably win again because, there's a reason everybody likes her. She's just extremely intelligent about this game. And I would be very excited to see what we can kind of verbally duke it out with.
I think, though, the ultimate point to get at here is that, like, what we got was less of a cohesive experience from those precons than you normally look for and normally hope for. And that is the final point for us to touch on, is that, like, the thing you were hoping would resonate didn't end up resonate, neither in gameplay nor even with the characters. And that is kind of like, dang. And so, like, for you, it's New Capenna precons, but like there are going to be, everyone's going to have their set of precons that just sort of fell short, that like didn't quite land for them. For me, it was Azuri Claw of Progress. So like we all are our proclivities,
We all have our bugaboos, and mine was pre-constructed decks. Yours is Azuri. Everybody's got them.
Mine is a Phyrexian that is giving out +1 counters, despite the fact that Phyrexians don't do that. But we each have our hangups and stuff.
Either way, well, Joey, why don't we ask the listeners, what was something else that disappointed you? What were some commanders that maybe didn't live up to the hype that you had for them? Let us know in the comments. We definitely want to hear it, because maybe we revisit this topic down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I kind of want to end with one final mention of just maybe something reads as disappointing, but giving it a shot, maybe it will play a little bit different than your first blush, your first glance expectation will be. I recently had that experience with the new Honest Rutstein. When I first saw it, I was kind of I don't know, but then I gave it a try and I was really impressed by it. So are there any things that you thought you'd be disappointed by, but you weren't disappointed by them? Keep your mind open for that too. I think that's an interesting place to go, and I'd love to hear from listeners about that as well. But Matt, you are right. It is time for this episode to come to a close. So how about you tell listeners where it is that they can find you online if they want to talk about Fallout stuff with you, for instance?
I mean, I would love to talk about Fallout stuff. You can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you are in the market for some of the best accessories on the market to protect your cards, Ultimate Guard is the one-stop shop for all of that, whether it's sleeves, deck boxes, and more.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me online at Joseph M. Schultz, most likely on places like Instagram or something like that. And you can find the cast at EDHRECast everywhere online. Plus, if you've got a question, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Listeners, we will be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.